Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
Thrown out for being barren, a hell's angel, whispers, "You're coming home with me." The fluorescent lights of the diner flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across Emily's tear-stained face. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Outside, the rain pelted against the windows in steady sheets, matching the storm of emotions raging inside her. 3 days. It had been 3 days since Mark had told her to leave, his words as cold as the wedding band he'd dropped on their kitchen counter. "I need someone who can give me a family," he'd said, as if the past 8 years of marriage meant nothing. As if she meant nothing. Emily stared down at her half-eaten burger and fries, her stomach churning. The diner was nearly empty at this late hour, save for a couple of truckers nursing their coffee at the counter. The waitress who had served her earlier kept shooting concerned glances her way, probably wondering why anyone would sit in a diner for hours on such a miserable night. A fresh wave of tears threatened to spill over as Emily reached into her purse, already knowing what she'd find. $3 and some loose change, not nearly enough to cover her meal. She'd spent the last of her cash on gas, hoping to make it to her sister's house 2 states over. But her old Honda had other plans, breaking down just outside this small town she didn't even know the name of. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Ma'am? The manager's voice cut through her thoughts. He was a tall man with thinning hair and tired eyes, his name tag reading Bob. "I'm going to need you to settle your bill." Emily's hands trembled as she looked up at him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I had enough, but—" She held out the crumpled bills, coins falling from her shaking fingers and rolling across the table. Bob's face hardened. "This isn't a charity, ma'am. Either pay the full amount or I'll have to call the authorities." The shame burned hot in Emily's chest as she stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. She gathered her meager belongings, ready to face the storm outside. It couldn't be worse than the storm within. That's when she heard it. The low rumble of a motorcycle engine cutting through the sound of rain. The diner's door swung open with a blast of wet air, and a massive figure filled the doorway. Emily froze. He was easily over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms covered in intricate tattoos. His leather vest bore the unmistakable patch of the Hell's Angels, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Emily's attention, deep brown and surprisingly gentle, taking in the scene before him. The biker's gaze moved from Bob to Emily, then to the scattered coins on the table. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a soul in need. "How much does she owe?" His voice was deep and gravelly, but there was no menace in it. Bob straightened up. $27.50. Without hesitation, the biker pulled out his wallet and placed 2 20s on the counter. "Keep the change." Then he turned to Emily, who stood frozen in place, clutching her purse like a shield. "You're coming home with me," he said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody should be out in weather like this. Emily stepped out into the rain, her shoes splashing in puddles that reflected the diner's neon signs. The downpour immediately soaked through her thin jacket, but the tall biker shielded her from the worst of it with his broad frame. His motorcycle, a massive black machine, waited beneath the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. "I'm Jack," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Most people call me Talon." He reached into a leather saddlebag and pulled out a spare helmet. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. The patches on his vest caught her eye. Hell's Angels, emblazoned in bold letters, along with various other insignias she didn't understand. Everything she'd ever heard about motorcycle gangs screamed at her to run. But where would she go? Back to the diner where Bob was probably already dialing the police? Into the storm with no money and no plan? She started, her voice trembling. I don't even know you. Jack's expression softened slightly as he held out the helmet. You don't have to know me to get out of the rain, sweetheart. Sometimes a helping hand is just that. A helping hand. Raindrops streamed down Emily's face, mixing with tears she hoped he couldn't see. Her fingers closed around the helmet, its solid weight somehow reassuring. Jack helped her adjust the strap, his calloused hands careful and precise. Hold on tight, he instructed, as he swung his leg over the bike. The engine roared to life, a deep rumble that vibrated through the pavement. Emily hesitated for just a moment before climbing on behind him. The leather of his vest was slick with rain under her fingers. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Emily tightened her grip around Jack's waist. The wind whipped at her clothes, but his body blocked most of the rain. Streetlights blurred past them, creating golden halos in the darkness. The motorcycle's engine changed pitch as they accelerated, settling into a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse through her entire body. Despite her racing thoughts, Emily found herself relaxing slightly. There was something almost hypnotic about the way the bike moved, the way it leaned into curves like a dancer. Jack handled the massive machine with confident ease, never pushing too fast on the wet roads. Through the visor of her helmet, Emily watched the small town slip away. They passed darkened storefronts, quiet neighborhoods, and finally broke free into open country roads. The rain continued its steady drumming, but the sound of the engine had become oddly comforting, a constant, dependable presence in a world that had recently shown her how undependable things could be. She should have been terrified. Everything about this situation went against common sense. Climbing onto a motorcycle with a stranger, a Hell's Angel no less. But something in the gentle way he'd handled the helmet, the careful way he took each turn, told a different story than his intimidating appearance suggested. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Jack's back against her chest. She couldn't explain the inexplicable sense of safety she felt, even as they rode through the darkness. Maybe it was because she truly had nowhere else to go, or maybe it was something else entirely, something in the way he'd looked at her with those understanding eyes back in the diner. Whatever it was, for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. The motorcycle's engine quieted to a low purr as they turned onto a winding driveway. Tall oak trees lined both sides, their branches creating a natural tunnel even in the darkness. Emily's grip on Jack's leather vest loosened slightly as they slowed, allowing her to take in her surroundings. The driveway seemed endless, curving through the wooded property until finally opening up to reveal a sight that made Emily blink in surprise. There, nestled among the trees, stood a magnificent house. Not the rough biker compound she'd half expected, but an elegant two-story home with warm lights glowing from within. The colonial-style architecture spoke of wealth and refinement, with its perfect symmetry and gleaming windows. Jack brought the motorcycle to a stop under a covered parking area near the house. The sudden silence felt heavy after the constant rumble of the engine. Emily's legs were shaky as she dismounted, her muscles stiff from the ride. Jack steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Easy there," he said, helping her with the helmet. "First time on a bike?" Emily nodded, unable to find her voice as she took in the manicured lawn and the stone pathway leading to the front door. Everything about this place seemed surreal, the complete opposite of what she'd imagined when she'd agreed to follow a Hell's Angel home. Raindrops still pattered on the roof above them, but here they were, sheltered. Jack pulled out a set of keys, the metallic jingle seeming oddly ordinary for such an extraordinary situation. As they approached the front door, Emily noticed the detailed craftsmanship of the woodwork, the brass hardware gleaming even in the dim light. "Welcome to my home," Jack said, pushing open the heavy wooden door. Emily stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister gleaming with polish. Hardwood floors stretched out before her, covered in places by elegant Persian rugs. The walls held tasteful artwork, and a crystal chandelier cast warm light throughout the entrance hall. Her wet shoes squeaked against the floor, making her acutely aware of how out of place she must look. Soaked to the bone, her clothes wrinkled and damp. She hugged herself tightly, trying to suppress a shiver. Jack moved past her with the ease of familiarity, his boots somehow silent on the hardwood. "Living room's this way," he said, gesturing to their right. "Let's get you warmed up." Emily followed him into a spacious room dominated by a stone fireplace. Comfortable-looking leather furniture was arranged to create an intimate seating area, and built-in bookshelves lined one wall. Nothing about this space suggested its owner was a member of a motorcycle gang. "Have a seat," Jack said, indicating a plush armchair near the fireplace. "I'll make us some tea, or coffee if you prefer." Emily sank into the chair, her body finally registering just how exhausted she was. The leather was butter-soft against her back, and despite her damp clothes, she felt herself beginning to relax. "Tea would be nice," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, but before heading to what she assumed was the kitchen, he turned back to her. His expression was serious but kind. "You're safe here, for as long as you need." The simple statement, delivered in his deep, gravelly voice, brought unexpected tears to Emily's eyes. She looked down at her hands, overwhelmed by the strange turn her evening had taken. Yet beneath the confusion and uncertainty, she felt something she hadn't expected. A tiny spark of hope. Fragile but undeniable. Emily sank deeper into the leather sofa, its softness a stark contrast to the hard bench she'd occupied at the diner. The room around her seemed to whisper of wealth and success, from the carefully curated artwork on the walls to the gleaming hardwood floors. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking time in this strange new reality she found herself in. Her damp clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, and she tried to sit in a way that wouldn't leave watermarks on the expensive furniture. The sound of Jack moving around in another room echoed through the house, and Emily found herself studying the space more closely. Family photos were conspicuously absent from the walls and shelves, replaced instead by landscapes and abstract pieces that revealed little about their owner. A wall of built-in bookshelves caught her attention. They held an impressive collection, everything from leather-bound classics to modern business volumes. This wasn't the library of someone who collected books for show. The spines were worn, suggesting frequent use. Emily spotted titles about investment strategies, property management, and business leadership nestled among works of literature. Her mind wandered to Jack, the contradiction between his appearance and his home growing more puzzling by the minute. The Hell's Angels vest had suggested one kind of life, but this elegant house painted a completely different picture. Was this really an act of kindness, or did he make a habit of collecting strays? The thought made her stomach twist uncomfortably. She heard his heavy footsteps returning and straightened up, trying to look less like the desperate woman he'd found outside the diner. Her fingers played nervously with the hem of her wet shirt as she wondered what came next. Would he expect something in return for his help? The thought made her heart race, though something in his manner told her she was safe. Jack's tall frame filled the doorway as he returned, but it was what he carried that caught Emily's attention. In his hands was a thick stack of papers, professionally bound and organized with colored tabs sticking out from the sides. He moved with the confidence of someone completely at ease in their surroundings, setting the papers down on the coffee table before taking a seat in an armchair across from her. "I run a few businesses," he said matter-of-factly, his voice gentler than his imposing appearance would suggest. He gestured to the papers, which Emily could now see were various financial reports and legal documents. "You don't need to worry about anything. Just relax, all right?" There was something disarming about his directness, about the way he seemed to anticipate and address her concerns without making her voice them. Emily felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, her breath coming easier than it had in days. She nodded slightly, accepting his words and the simple kindness behind them. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm, but now its sound felt less imposing, more like a heartbeat giving life to the room. Emily let her hands relax in her lap, no longer fidgeting with her clothes. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to exist in this moment without questioning what would come next. Looking at Jack's earnest expression, she felt the hard shell of distrust she'd built around herself begin to crack. Maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world, even if they came in unexpected packages. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of a simple but hearty meal. Emily sat at the large wooden table, watching as Jack moved around the kitchen with surprising grace for such a big man. He'd insisted on cooking, pulling together a quick pasta dish that smelled divine. "Hope you like Italian," he said, setting a steaming plate in front of her. "It's nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." Emily wrapped her hands around the warm bowl, savoring the comfort it brought. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jack settled into his chair across from her, his massive frame making the furniture seem almost small. "No need for thanks. Everyone needs help sometimes." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jack spoke again. "You're probably wondering about all this," he gestured around the room with his fork. "The house, the businesses, the whole setup." Emily nodded, curiosity getting the better of her caution. "I have to admit, it's not what I expected from a Hell's Angel." Jack's laugh was deep and genuine. "Yeah, I get that a lot." He took a sip of water, his eyes growing distant with memory. "Started with the club when I was young and angry at the world. Found a family there, in my own way, but I always had bigger dreams." Emily found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by his story. The pasta on her plate was momentarily forgotten as she listened. "Started small. Bought a rundown garage, fixed it up. Learned about business the hard way, making every mistake in the book." His voice carried no shame, just simple honesty. "But I learned, kept learning. The garage became 2, then 3. Branched out into real estate, then investments." "All on your own?" Emily asked, genuinely interested. Jack nodded, twirling pasta around his fork. "Every penny earned, every lesson learned the hard way. The angels taught me about loyalty and brotherhood. But business?" He smiled. That was self-taught. After they finished eating, Jack stood up, gesturing for Emily to follow. "Let me show you around. You should know where everything is if you're staying here." The house was even more impressive on the full tour. Jack led her through each room, his voice steady and calming as he explained the layout. The library was Emily's favorite, walls of books reaching to the ceiling, with comfortable leather chairs tucked into cozy corners. "Feel free to read anything you like," Jack said, noting her interest. "I spend a lot of time in here myself. They moved on to a warm, inviting lounge with plush sofas and a large fireplace. Everything spoke of comfort and careful consideration, so different from the harsh exterior Jack presented to the world. The guest rooms were last on the tour, spacious and well-appointed, each with its own bathroom. "Take whichever one you prefer," Jack told her. "They're all made up and ready." Emily stood in the doorway of one of the rooms, taking in the soft bedding and tasteful decor. The whole evening felt surreal. The quiet dinner, the tour, the gentle way this intimidating man had opened his home to her. For the first time since her world had crumbled, she felt something close to peace. Looking at the room that could be hers, Emily felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe things weren't as hopeless as they had seemed in the rain outside that diner. Maybe, just maybe, things might be okay. The sheets were impossibly soft against Emily's skin as she lay in the guest bed, staring up at the shadows dancing across the ceiling. The room was bigger than her old master bedroom, with a plush carpet and elegant furnishings that spoke of quiet wealth. Everything about it felt foreign, like she'd stepped into someone else's life by mistake. Rain still pattered against the windows, but softer now, a gentle rhythm that should have been soothing. Instead, her thoughts raced in endless circles. The events of the day felt like scenes from a movie she couldn't quite believe. Just hours ago, she'd been huddled outside a diner, soaked and hopeless. Now she was lying in a millionaire's guest room, brought there by a Hell's Angel with kind eyes and gentle words. Emily shifted onto her side, pulling the downy comforter closer. What was Jack really offering her? The question nagged at her mind, impossible to ignore. He'd been nothing but kind, but experience had taught her that kindness usually came with strings attached. Her ex-husband's words echoed in her head. "Nothing in this world is free, Emily." The mattress seemed to cradle her tired body, but her mind refused to rest. Was she naive to accept his help so readily? She'd seen the way he lived, the obvious wealth surrounding him. Men like that didn't just take in strays without expecting something in return. But what could he want from her? She had nothing left to give. Rolling onto her back again, Emily pressed her palms against her eyes. The shame of her situation washed over her anew. Here she was, 30 years old and essentially homeless, accepting charity from a complete stranger. Her mother would be mortified. The thought brought a bitter smile to her lips. Her mother had always warned her about depending too much on others. The house creaked softly, settling in the night. Emily's eyes darted to the door, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. Jack seemed trustworthy, but she barely knew him. The lock on the door had provided some comfort, but it didn't stop the parade of what-ifs marching through her mind. Exhaustion began to creep in, making her thoughts fuzzy around the edges. The events of the day, the humiliation at the diner, the motorcycle ride through the rain, the surprising revelation of Jack's wealth all began to blur together. Her eyelids grew heavy, but sleep remained elusive. In the space between waking and dreaming, memories of her old life filtered through her consciousness. The day she'd learned she couldn't have children, the look on her husband's face when the doctor confirmed it, the slow unraveling of everything she'd thought was certain in her life. The betrayal still felt fresh, a wound that refused to heal. As sleep finally began to pull her under, Emily's last conscious thoughts were of Jack's kindness, the gentle way he'd spoken to her, how he'd given her space to breathe, the absence of judgment in his eyes. A part of her desperately wanted to believe it was genuine, that someone could be kind simply for kindness's sake. But doubt lingered, whispering caution even as exhaustion claimed her. Her dreams, when they came, were a confused mix of past and present. Her ex-husband's accusations blended with Jack's gentle offers of help, creating a disjointed narrative that offered no peace. Through it all, the question remained: what was Jack really offering her, and what would it cost in the end? Emily stirred as warm sunlight crept across her face. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to wake up in her old bedroom or even on a friend's couch. Instead, she found herself wrapped in the softest sheets she'd ever felt, in a room that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. The events of the previous night came rushing back: the diner, the rain, and Jack, the intimidating yet gentle Hell's Angel who'd brought her to this unexpected sanctuary. Emily sat up slowly, running her fingers through her tangled hair. The room looked different in the morning light, less imposing and more welcoming. Sunbeams danced across the hardwood floor, creating patterns that seemed to welcome the new day. Her clothes from yesterday lay neatly folded on a nearby chair. She remembered changing into the comfortable pajamas Jack had provided. They were new, still with tags on them, making her wonder if he kept them for guests, or if he'd somehow managed to get them for her specifically. The silence in the house was different from what she'd expected. It wasn't the heavy, lonely kind she'd grown used to in the past months, but rather a peaceful quiet that felt almost healing. Outside her window, birds chirped their morning songs, and a light breeze rustled through the trees. Emily slipped out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She padded to the window and drew back the curtains fully, taking in the view of the well-maintained gardens below. Everything about this place spoke of care and attention, so different from the rough exterior Jack presented to the world. She caught her reflection in the window and hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her looked tired, but somehow lighter, as if a small portion of her burden had lifted overnight. The safe harbor Jack had provided, however temporary it might be, had given her something she'd been missing for months: a moment to breathe. A soft knock at the door made her turn. "Come in," she called out, wrapping her arms around herself. The door opened slowly, and Jack appeared, holding a tray laden with breakfast. The sight of this imposing man, still in his leather vest but carefully balancing a delicate china coffee pot and cups, struck her as both amusing and touching. Steam rose from the coffee pot, and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. "Good morning," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Thought you might be hungry." He set the tray down on a small table by the window, and Emily noticed how he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. "Thank you," she replied, the words feeling inadequate for all he'd done. "You didn't have to do this." Jack straightened up and looked at her with those kind eyes that seemed at odds with his tough appearance. "You can stay as long as you need," he said simply, as if offering his home to strangers was the most natural thing in the world. Emily nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she managed again, softer this time. The gratitude was genuine, even if uncertainty still lingered beneath it. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, warming the room and casting everything in a golden glow. In this moment, despite all her doubts and fears, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: a glimmer of hope. The morning routine became familiar to Emily over the next few days. She'd wake up to sunlight streaming through her window, have breakfast in the kitchen, and then find ways to make herself useful around Jack's sprawling property. At first, she'd stuck to simple tasks: tidying up, organizing papers, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to darker places. Jack's house was immaculate, but there was always something that needed attention. Emily found herself drawn to the garden, where colorful flowers bloomed in neat beds. She spent hours pulling weeds and pruning bushes, finding peace in the repetitive work. The physical labor helped quiet her racing thoughts. "You've got quite the green thumb," Jack commented one afternoon, appearing beside her as she trimmed back some overgrown roses. His massive frame cast a shadow over her work, but his presence had become less intimidating with each passing day. "My grandmother taught me," Emily replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "She always said gardens were good for the soul." Jack nodded, settling himself on a nearby bench. "Smart woman?" He watched her work for a while, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I started out with nothing but a motorcycle and determination." Emily paused her pruning, turning to face him. The sun caught the silver in his beard as he spoke, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Worked every job I could find," he continued. "Construction, security, whatever paid. Saved every penny." His weathered hands flexed unconsciously. "First business was a small repair shop. Worked 16-hour days, slept on a cot in the back." Emily sat on the grass, listening intently. Jack rarely spoke about himself, and there was something compelling about hearing how this imposing man had built his life from scratch. "Made some good investments," he went on. "Property mostly, then more businesses. Things just grew." He gestured at the grand house behind them. "All this? Sometimes I still can't believe it myself." Emily looked around at the manicured lawn, the elegant house, the expensive cars in the driveway. Everything spoke of wealth and success, a world so far removed from her own experiences that it felt almost unreal. She glanced down at her dirt-stained hands and worn clothes, feeling suddenly very small. "Your story is amazing," she said quietly, trying to hide her discomfort. "You've accomplished so much." Jack must have noticed something in her tone, because his expression softened. "Everyone needs a helping hand sometimes," he said. "I had people who believed in me when I was starting out. Now I can do the same for others." His words, though kind, made Emily's stomach twist. Was that all she was to him? Another person to help? Another project? The roses she'd been tending suddenly seemed too perfect, too expensive. She didn't belong in this world of wealth and success. She was just lost. She forced a smile, but doubt crept in like shadows at dusk. Jack had been incredibly generous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was just another charity case for this wealthy man who seemed to make a habit of helping the less fortunate. The afternoon sun continued to warm the garden, but Emily felt a chill she couldn't explain. She turned back to the roses, needing something to do with her hands, while her mind wrestled with uncertainty. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the garden as Emily watched Jack tend to his prized roses. His massive hands, marked with years of hard work and decorated with faded tattoos, moved with surprising delicacy among the thorny stems. She couldn't help but notice how someone so intimidating could be so gentle. "You've got to be careful with these ones," Jack explained, demonstrating the proper angle for pruning. "Cut too close to the bloom, and you'll damage next year's growth. Too far, and you're not helping the plant at all." Emily nodded, taking the pruning shears from him. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them on a stem. Jack stood close behind her, his presence reassuring rather than overwhelming. "That's it," he encouraged as she made the cut. "Nice and steady. You've got good instincts." A warm feeling spread through her chest at his praise. It had been so long since anyone had shown her this kind of patience. Her ex-husband had always been quick to point out her failures, never her successes. They worked side by side, falling into a comfortable rhythm. Jack would occasionally point out which branches needed attention, but mostly they pruned in companionable silence. The sweet scent of roses filled the air, mingling with the earthy smell of fresh soil. "Let's take a break," Jack suggested after a while, wiping his brow. I've got some sandwiches in the kitchen. They settled on the patio, where Jack had set up a simple lunch. The wooden table between them held plates of thick sandwiches and tall glasses of iced tea. Emily watched as Jack's large hands carefully arranged everything, still amazed by his contradictions, the tough exterior housing such consideration. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning more than just the lunch. The simple domesticity of the moment almost overwhelmed her. Jack looked up, his eyes kind beneath his furrowed brow. "You don't have to thank me for everything, Emily." Something in his tone, the genuine warmth, the lack of judgment, made her walls crumble a little. She stared down at her sandwich, trying to find the right words. "My husband," she started, then had to take a deep breath. "He left when we found out I couldn't have children." The words felt like glass in her throat, but she forced them out. "The doctor said it wasn't possible. Something about my body just wasn't made for it." Jack set down his sandwich, giving her his full attention. His face remained neutral, but his eyes held a depth of understanding that made her continue. "He said he couldn't handle it," Emily's voice wavered. "Couldn't handle a wife who couldn't give him a family, as if I wasn't enough on my own." She blinked back tears, remembering the day he'd packed his bags. As if I had chosen this. Jack stayed quiet, but his presence felt like a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix things. He just listened, really listened, in a way no one had since her world had fallen apart. "I thought I'd come to terms with it," she admitted, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. "But sometimes it hits me all over again. The fact that I'll never—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack's eyes softened with understanding, and in that moment Emily felt truly seen. Not as a broken woman or a charity case, but as someone whose pain mattered. The weight she'd been carrying seemed a little lighter under his gentle gaze. The rumble of a motorcycle engine, different from Jack's familiar bike, cut through the peaceful afternoon. Emily looked up from her book in the living room as heavy boots stomped up the front steps. Jack emerged from his office, his usual relaxed expression tightening slightly. The front door swung open without a knock, and a tall man in military fatigues strode in. His buzz cut and rigid posture screamed authority, and his eyes swept the room with calculated precision before landing on Emily. "Mike," Jack greeted his brother, clasping his hand. "Didn't know you were coming by." "Had some business nearby," Mike replied, his voice clipped and formal. He turned to Emily, his gaze analytical. "And who's this?" Emily rose from her seat, trying to keep her hands steady. Where Jack's presence had become comforting, Mike's intensity made her want to shrink into herself. "I'm Emily," she managed, forcing a polite smile. "Emily's staying with me for a while," Jack explained, his tone carrying a hint of warning that Emily hadn't heard before. Mike's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." The words held volumes of unspoken judgment. "I'll get dinner started," Jack said, breaking the tension. "Mike, you're welcome to join us." Emily followed Jack into the kitchen, grateful for the excuse to escape Mike's scrutiny. As she helped prepare the meal, she could feel Mike watching her from his seat at the kitchen island, his posture never relaxing. "So, Emily," Mike's voice cut through the kitchen sounds. "What brings you to my brother's place?" Emily nearly dropped the plate she was holding. She's here because I invited her," Jack interrupted, his voice firm. "That's all you need to know." The dining room felt smaller than usual as they sat down to eat. Emily pushed her food around her plate, appetite diminished by Mike's constant observation. The military man ate with precise movements, his eyes occasionally flicking between her and Jack. Jack mentioned you were married before, Mike said suddenly, making Emily's fork clatter against her plate. What happened there? The room seemed to grow colder. Emily's throat tightened as memories of her ex-husband flooded back. It didn't work out, she managed. Heard it was because you couldn't have kids, Mike continued, his tone matter of fact. Must have been quite a blow to your husband's plans. Emily felt as if she'd been slapped. The familiar shame washed over her, and she stared at her plate, willing herself not to cry. That's enough. Jack's voice was like thunder. He set his fork down with deliberate control, but his eyes blazed as he looked at his brother. You don't know anything about Emily's situation, and you don't get to judge it. Not in my house. Mike's expression hardened. I'm just trying to understand. No, Jack cut him off. You're being cruel, and you know it. Emily's my guest, and I won't have you treating her like this. Emily sat frozen, touched by Jack's defense but mortified that her personal life had become dinner conversation. She could feel tears threatening to spill and blinked rapidly to hold them back. The weight of Mike's judgment pressed down on her, making her feel exposed and vulnerable, like all her carefully hidden wounds had been ripped open for examination. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across Emily's bedroom floor. She stretched, and immediately noticed the quiet that filled the house, the kind of silence that meant Jack was already gone. It was becoming a familiar rhythm, waking up to find him already at work, managing his empire of businesses. Emily pulled herself out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. The house felt different when Jack wasn't there. Bigger somehow, more imposing. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shake off an uneasy feeling that had been growing over the past few days. In the kitchen, she found a fresh pot of coffee waiting, still warm. Jack always thought of these little things. A note sat next to the coffee maker in his neat handwriting. Help yourself to breakfast? Back this afternoon. Jay. Emily poured herself a cup and wandered to the living room window. The grounds stretched out before her, perfectly maintained. Everything about this place spoke of wealth and care, so different from the life she'd known. She sipped her coffee slowly, her mind drifting to uncomfortable questions. Why was Jack doing all this? The coffee? The comfortable bed? The safe haven he'd created for her? People didn't just do things like this without expecting something in return, did they? Her ex-husband's voice echoed in her head. Nothing comes free in this world, Emily. She moved through the house, touching things lightly as she passed. The expensive artwork on the walls, the leather-bound books in the library, the crystal vases holding fresh flowers. It all seemed too good to be true. Jack, with his tough exterior and gentle heart, his wealth and his kindness, what did he want from her? The thought made her stomach twist. She'd seen how people looked at them when they went into town together. The raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations. Did they think she was using him for his money? Did he think that's what she wanted? Emily found herself in front of the mirror in the hallway, studying her reflection. She saw what others must see, a woman who had nothing, living in the home of a wealthy man. The shame of it burned in her chest. She'd never asked for any of this, never wanted to be dependent on anyone's charity. The hours crawled by as Emily tried to busy herself with small tasks around the house. She organized the kitchen cabinets, dusted the shelves, anything to keep her mind from spinning with questions she couldn't answer. But the doubts kept creeping back in, like shadows lengthening as the day wore on. The sound of Jack's motorcycle finally broke through her thoughts late in the afternoon. She heard the garage door open and close, followed by his heavy boots in the hallway. Emily stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in wiping down the counter for the third time. "Hey," Jack's voice was warm as he entered the kitchen. He paused, and she could feel his eyes on her. "What's wrong?" Emily kept her focus on the counter, forcing a small smile. "Nothing. Just cleaning up a bit." She could hear the concern in his voice as he stepped closer. "Emily. Really, I'm fine," she insisted, still not meeting his eyes. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to add her doubts to everything else he'd taken on by helping her. Jack didn't push, but when she finally glanced up, she found him watching her with that gentle understanding that made her heart ache. He gave her a reassuring smile, and for a moment all her doubts felt foolish in the face of his genuine kindness. Emily stood in the bustling community center kitchen, her hands busy organizing boxes of donated food. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air as volunteers moved around her, preparing meals for the day's visitors. She checked her list again, making sure everything was in order just as Jack had taught her. "We need more soup containers over here," someone called from across the room. Emily quickly grabbed a stack from the storage area, her movements now confident and purposeful. Just 2 weeks ago, she would have hesitated, unsure of where anything was. Now she moved through the space like she belonged there. Jack watched from the doorway, his imposing figure softened by the gentle smile on his face. "You're getting pretty good at this," he said, walking over to help her with the heavy boxes. "I had a good teacher," Emily replied, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his praise. She'd been surprised when Jack first mentioned his community outreach programs. The tough-looking biker running soup kitchens and shelter programs wasn't what she'd expected, but now it made perfect sense. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Emily helped serve meals, talked with the visitors, and learned their stories. An elderly man told her about losing his home after his wife died. A young mother shared her struggles to feed her children on minimum wage. Each story touched Emily's heart, reminding her that everyone carried their own burdens. "Sometimes just listening makes a difference," Jack had told her on her first day. She understood that now, seeing how people's faces lit up when someone took the time to really hear them. During the lunch rush, Emily worked alongside Jack, matching his steady pace. They'd developed an easy rhythm, moving around each other in the crowded space without words. She handed him plates while he served the hot meals, their synchronized movements drawing grateful smiles from the people in line. "Thank you, dear," an older woman said, clutching Emily's hand. "It means so much to have someone care." Emily squeezed the woman's hand back, fighting tears. She remembered sitting in that diner, feeling worthless and alone. Now, here she was, helping others who felt the same way. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the afternoon wound down, Emily found herself organizing the pantry for the next day. Each can and package she sorted represented a meal for someone in need. The simple act of putting things in order gave her a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in months. "You know," Jack said, appearing beside her with more supplies, "we couldn't run this place half as well without you." Emily paused, a can of soup in her hand. "I'm just trying to help," she said softly. "You're doing more than that," Jack replied. "You're making a real difference here. These people trust you. They open up to you." Looking around the pantry, Emily realized he was right. This wasn't just busy work or a distraction from her problems. Here, in this simple room full of donated food, she'd found something she'd been missing. Purpose. Her inability to have children had made her feel broken, useless. But helping others, being there for them in their moments of need, this was a different kind of nurturing. She placed the can on the shelf with newfound reverence. Each item represented hope for someone else, just as Jack had offered hope to her that rainy night. She wasn't just helping him with his mission. She was finding her own way forward, one small act of kindness at a time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as Emily and Jack finished cleaning up after the day's community service. Most of the volunteers had gone home, leaving them alone in the comfortable quiet. Emily wiped down the counter while Jack stored the last of the clean dishes. "You remind me of her sometimes," Jack said suddenly, his voice soft and distant. Emily looked up, surprised by the unexpected comment. Jack leaned against the counter, his usual confident posture replaced by something more vulnerable. "Who?" Emily asked gently, setting down her cleaning cloth. Jack's eyes focused on something far away. "Sarah, my first love." He took a deep breath. "She was like you. Always wanted to help others. Had this way of making everyone feel heard." Emily stood quietly, sensing the weight of what Jack was sharing. His shoulders hunched slightly, making his large frame seem smaller somehow. "We were young, had our whole lives planned out," he continued, absently tracing patterns on the counter with his finger. "Then one rainy night, a drunk driver." His voice trailed off, and Emily's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Jack," she whispered, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his arm. He nodded, clearing his throat. "After that, I threw myself into building the business, joined the Angels, focused on making money. Figured if I kept busy enough, kept everyone at arm's length, it wouldn't hurt anymore." A sad smile crossed his face. "Didn't work out quite like I planned." Emily understood that kind of pain, the kind that made you build walls so high you could barely see over them yourself. She watched as Jack moved to the window, his reflection overlapping with the darkening sky outside. "People saw the success, the tough biker image," he said. "Made it easier to keep them away. But being alone..." He shook his head. "That's its own kind of pain." The kitchen felt smaller somehow, more intimate. Emily could see the years of hurt etched in the lines around Jack's eyes, the careful way he held himself apart even now. "Started all this," he gestured around the community center, thinking maybe helping others would fill the empty spaces. And it helps, but... He turned to look at her directly. "Sometimes I wonder if I've forgotten how to let people in." Emily felt the truth of his words deep in her chest. How many times had she asked herself the same thing these past months? After her marriage fell apart, she'd built her own walls, convinced she was better off alone than risking more pain. Jack moved away from the window, his expression softening. "Come on," he said, his voice warming. "Let me make us dinner." Later, Emily sat across from Jack at his kitchen table, a simple but lovely meal between them. Candles flickered, casting a gentle glow over their faces. The conversation had shifted to lighter topics, but something had changed between them. Each smile felt more genuine. Each shared glance held more understanding. Emily watched Jack as he told a funny story about his early days in business. His guard was down now, his laugh more real. She saw him differently, not as the intimidating biker who'd rescued her, or the successful businessman who'd given her shelter. Instead, she saw someone who understood loss, who knew what it meant to feel broken and keep going anyway. Emily was pruning roses in the front garden when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, her heart stopped. A familiar blue sedan pulled into the driveway, and behind the wheel sat David, her ex-husband. Her fingers tightened around the pruning shears. The car door opened, and David stepped out, his business suit as neat as ever. He looked different somehow, thinner maybe, or just tired. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Emily?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" She straightened up, willing her hands not to shake. I could ask you the same thing." David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she once found endearing. Now it just made her stomach turn. "I'm here to discuss a business deal with Jack Malone. I had no idea you—" He trailed off, taking in her casual clothes and the garden tools. "Are you living here?" "That's none of your business anymore," Emily said, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "You made sure of that when you walked out." He took a step toward her, and she instinctively stepped back. I've been thinking about us." "Don't." The word came out sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare." "I handled things badly," David continued, his voice softening. "I was overwhelmed, confused. Maybe we could talk." "Overwhelmed?" Emily's laugh was bitter. "I was the one who couldn't have children. I was the one who needed support. But you—" She shook her head. "You just packed your bags and left." David's face flushed. "It wasn't that simple." "It was exactly that simple," Emily cut him off. "You couldn't handle that I wasn't perfect, that I couldn't give you what you wanted. So you ran." The garden suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Emily could feel tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. "I made a mistake," David said quietly. "I miss you." The words she'd once longed to hear now felt like poison. "You miss the idea of me, the woman you thought I was supposed to be." Heavy footsteps approached from behind her. Jack appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. He didn't say anything, just stood there, a silent guardian. David's expression changed, flickering between confusion and something else. Jealousy, maybe. "I didn't realize you and Jack were—" He left the sentence hanging. "Were what?" Emily's voice was ice. "Friends. Unlike you, Jack actually stood by me when I needed someone." "Emily, please." "I think you should leave," she said firmly. "Whatever business you have with Jack can wait for another day." David looked between them, his shoulders sagging slightly. He nodded, turning back toward his car. Before getting in, he paused. "I really am sorry, Em." Emily watched him drive away, her body rigid with tension. She could feel Jack's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. The touch anchored her, keeping her from floating away on a sea of painful memories. They stood there together as the dust settled on the driveway, Emily's heart raw and aching from the encounter. The carefully tended roses swayed in the breeze, their thorns glinting in the afternoon sun. She'd pricked herself on them countless times while learning to care for them, but she'd grown stronger for it. Just like now. The evening settled over the house like a warm blanket. Emily sat curled up on the leather couch, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in her hands. The encounter with David had left her exhausted, wrung out like an old dish rag. The living room lights were dim, casting soft shadows on the walls. Jack came in from his office, his footsteps heavy after a long day. Without saying anything, he sank down next to her on the couch. The leather creaked under his weight. Emily could feel the warmth radiating from him, solid and real. "Rough day," he said. It wasn't a question. Emily nodded, staring into her tea. The liquid rippled with her slight tremors. "Seeing David?" She swallowed hard. "It brought everything back." Jack stayed quiet, giving her space to continue. That's what she appreciated about him. He never rushed her, never pushed. "You know what the worst part is?" Her voice cracked a little. "It's not even about him anymore. It's about me." She set the tea down on the coffee table, wrapping her arms around herself. "Every time I look in the mirror, I see someone who's broken, incomplete." The word hung in the air between them. Emily's chest felt tight, like a band was squeezing it. When the doctors first told me I couldn't have children, I thought it was just bad news, you know? Something to deal with, move past. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. But then David left, and suddenly it wasn't just news anymore. It became who I am. Jack shifted slightly beside her, but remained silent, listening. I keep thinking about all the things I'll never experience. First steps, first words, school plays. Her voice wobbled. Mother's Day cards made with glitter and too much glue. And it's not just about missing those things. It's about feeling like I'm not... She struggled to find the words. Like I'm not a real woman somehow. Like something vital is missing. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. But she couldn't stop now. The words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. Everyone says there are other options, other ways to be a mother. But that's not the point. The point is that my body failed me, and now I'm afraid. She took a shaky breath. I'm afraid that I'll never be enough for anyone, that I'll always be this broken thing that people either pity or abandon. The room felt heavy with her confession. Emily could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, marking each second of vulnerability. Jack shifted again, and she felt his calloused hand cover hers. His touch was gentle, almost tentative, so different from his usual confident demeanor. Emily, he said, his voice low and serious. You're not broken. You never were. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. His eyes held no pity, only a fierce kind of understanding that made her breath catch. A tiny spark of something, hope, maybe, flickered in her chest for the first time in months. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm, but somehow the weight in Emily's chest felt a little lighter. Jack's hand remained on hers, warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. The community center bustled with quiet activity as Emily walked through its doors. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the paper cup of coffee Jack had bought her on the drive over. The smell of stale cookies and fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the murmur of conversation from the room down the hall. You don't have to do this, Jack said softly beside her. His leather vest creaked as he shifted his weight. Emily took a deep breath. I know, but I want to. The support group met in a plain room with metal chairs arranged in a circle. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in a harsh glow. Emily chose a seat near the back, grateful when Jack settled into the chair next to her. His presence felt like a shield. Sarah, the group facilitator, welcomed everyone with a warm smile. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. We have some new faces today, she said. Would anyone like to start? Emily's heart pounded as others shared their stories. A woman named Marie talked about her third miscarriage. Thomas spoke about his wife leaving him after years of failed IVF. Each story echoed pieces of Emily's own pain. When her turn came, Emily's voice quavered. I'm Emily, she started, staring into her coffee cup. And I can't have children. The words still hurt, but somehow less than before. Maybe it was the gentle nods of understanding from around the circle, or the way Jack's knee pressed reassuringly against hers. My husband left me when we found out, she continued. He said he couldn't handle it, couldn't handle me. Emily's fingers tightened around her cup. For a long time, I thought that meant I was broken, that I wasn't enough. A woman across the circle wiped away tears, nodding in recognition. I lost my home, my marriage, my dreams of being a mother. Emily's voice grew stronger. But lately, I'm starting to think that maybe that's not the end of my story. The group listened intently as Emily shared more. She talked about finding unexpected kindness, about learning to see herself differently. With each word, something inside her loosened, like a knot slowly coming undone. Other meetings followed. Week after week, Emily returned to that circle of chairs. She learned names, shared tears, celebrated small victories. Marie got a puppy. Thomas started dating again. Life, they all discovered, had a way of continuing. After one particularly moving session where a longtime member announced her successful adoption, Emily and Jack walked to his motorcycle in comfortable silence. The evening air was cool against her skin, carrying the first hints of autumn. Emily stopped beside the bike, turning to face Jack. His expression was soft in the fading light. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For bringing me here. For encouraging me to come back." She gestured vaguely at the community center. "I never thought talking about it would help, but it does. Hearing other people's stories, sharing mine, it makes me feel less alone." Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You were never alone, Emily." "I know that now." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "And I'm starting to think that maybe there's more to life than what I lost. Maybe..." She took a deep breath. "Maybe this is just the beginning of something new." The parking lot lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Emily felt lighter than she had in months, as if sharing her burden had physically lifted some weight from her shoulders. Emily pushed her shopping cart down the cereal aisle, humming softly to herself. The fluorescent lights of Marshall's grocery buzzed overhead, and the familiar jingle of the store's music system played in the background. She reached for a box of granola, planning to make something special for breakfast tomorrow. The past few weeks at the support group had given her a new sense of peace. Even the simple act of grocery shopping felt different now. Lighter, somehow. She smiled, thinking about how Jack had started requesting specific snacks for their evening talks. "Emily?" The voice made her freeze. Her hand, still stretched toward the shelf, began to tremble. She knew that voice, had heard it say, "I love you," and later, "I can't do this anymore," with equal conviction. David stood at the end of the aisle, looking exactly as she remembered. His blue dress shirt was perfectly pressed. His wedding ring, new wedding ring, she noticed with a jolt, catching the harsh store lighting. "I thought that was you," he said, taking a step closer. Emily's throat felt tight. "David." She managed a small nod, desperately wishing she could disappear between the boxes of cereal and granola bars. "You look..." He paused, his eyes traveling over her face. "Different." Emily's fingers gripped the shopping cart handle tighter. "It's been 6 months." "Right." He shifted uncomfortably. "I heard you're staying with someone. Some biker?" The way he said it made her skin crawl. Like Jack was something dirty, something beneath them. "His name is Jack," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "He's been very kind to me." David's face twisted into something ugly. "Kind? Is that what you're calling it? First you can't give me children, and now you're living with some hell's angel?" The words hit her like physical blows. Emily felt the familiar shame rising in her chest, threatening to choke her. "You really have fallen, haven't you?" David continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I guess when you're damaged goods, you can't be picky about who takes you in." Emily's vision blurred with tears. The store suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too everything. She abandoned her cart, turning away from David's cruel smile. "That's right, run away," he called after her. "It's what you're good at." She fumbled with her phone as she burst through the store's automatic doors, barely able to see the screen through her tears. Jack answered on the first ring. "Emily, what's wrong?" "Can you..." She tried to steady her voice. Can you come get me? Please? I'm on my way. She huddled on a bench outside the store, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could physically hold together the pieces that felt like they were falling apart. The rumble of Jack's motorcycle came just minutes later. He took one look at her face, and his expression darkened. What happened? David, she whispered. He was here. He said... Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Jack's jaw clenched. Don't let him get to you, he said, his voice firm but gentler than she'd ever heard it. Whatever he said, it's not true. But Emily could still hear David's words echoing in her head. Damaged goods. Fallen. The truth of her inability to have children felt like an open wound again, raw and bleeding. Jack helped her onto his motorcycle, his strong hands steady and sure. But even his solid presence couldn't completely chase away the doubts that David had stirred up. She pressed her face against Jack's leather vest, letting the tears fall silently as they rode away from the store. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft clink of dishes as Emily methodically washed them, letting the warm water run over her hands. She'd been at it for nearly an hour, cleaning things that were already clean, trying to keep her mind busy. Jack sat at the kitchen island, his presence impossible to ignore. He hadn't said much since they got back from the store, but his eyes followed her every movement. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band ready to snap. You going to tell me what he said to you? Jack's voice was gentle but firm. Emily scrubbed harder at an already spotless plate. It doesn't matter. Clearly it does. She shook her head, focusing on the soap bubbles in the sink. Her hands were pruned from the water, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. If she stopped, she'd have to think about David's words, about how right he was. Emily. Jack's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up. Look at me. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders tense. I should probably go, she said quietly. The words felt heavy in her mouth. I've imposed on you long enough. Imposed? Jack's voice held a note of disbelief. Is that what you think you've been doing? Emily finally turned off the water, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. She swallowed hard. I'm just taking advantage of your kindness. Living here, letting you take care of me. It's not fair to you. Fair to me? Jack moved closer, but stopped when he saw her, tense up. You think I don't want you here? Why would you? The words burst out before she could stop them. I'm just some broken woman you found outside a diner. I can't even... Her voice cracked. I can't even have children. What kind of woman does that make me? Jack's silence made her continue, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. David was right. I'm damaged goods. I don't belong here, in this beautiful house, with someone like you who has everything together. I should just go before... Stop. Jack's voice was quiet, but commanding. Just stop. Emily finally looked up at him, her vision blurry with unshed tears. His face was a mix of anger and something else she couldn't quite read. You don't need to leave, Emily. His words were soft but intense. You're not broken. She tried to turn away, but Jack stepped closer, his presence filling her space. Listen to me. Whatever that jackass said to you today, whatever he made you believe about yourself, it's all garbage. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. You don't understand. I understand plenty. Jack's voice grew softer. I understand that you're stronger than you think. I understand that not being able to have children doesn't make you any less of a woman. And I understand that you belong here as long as you want to stay. His words hit something deep inside her, but the walls she'd built were thick and high. She'd heard kind words before, from her ex-husband, from friends, from family. All of them had eventually given up on her. Why would Jack be any different? She stared at the floor, her heart pounding, caught between wanting to believe him and being terrified to try. The evening settled over Jack's house like a heavy blanket. Emily stood by the large window in the living room, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in deep purples and oranges. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and uncertain. Behind her, Jack moved around in the kitchen, the quiet sounds of him making tea providing a gentle backdrop to her churning thoughts. The day's events kept replaying in her mind. David's cruel words, Jack's kindness, the constant battle between staying and running. When Jack appeared with 2 steaming mugs, Emily accepted hers with trembling hands. The warmth seeped through her fingers, grounding her in the moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the tea." Jack settled into his usual armchair, his large frame somehow less intimidating in the soft evening light. "Want to tell me what's really going on in that head of yours?" Emily took a shaky breath. The words she'd been holding back all day pressed against her chest, demanding to be let out. "I feel broken." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Not just because I can't have children. It's more than that." Jack remained silent, giving her space to continue. His steady presence encouraged her to keep going. "Every time I look in the mirror, I see someone who failed. Failed at being a wife, failed at being a woman." She wrapped her arms around herself. "David used to say that having children was the most natural thing in the world, but I couldn't even do that right." "Emily," Jack started, but she held up her hand. "Please, let me finish." She took another breath. "The worst part isn't even the infertility itself. It's the shame, the constant fear that no one will ever really love me because I'm incomplete, damaged." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Unlovable." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken emotions. Emily could feel Jack's eyes on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. "Can I tell you something?" Jack's voice was unusually soft. He set his mug down and leaned forward in his chair. "You're not the only one who's scared." This made Emily look up. Jack's face held in vulnerability she'd never seen before. "After Sarah died, my first love, I built walls so high I thought no one would ever get through them." He ran a hand through his beard, a gesture Emily had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. Being tough, being successful, running businesses. It was easier than letting anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Emily watched as Jack struggled with his next words. This man, who seemed so strong and confident, was sharing his own fears with her. "The truth is," he continued, "I'm terrified of opening up, of being vulnerable, of letting someone see past all this." He gestured to his tattooed arms and leather vest. "Because the last time I did—" "You lost everything," Emily finished softly. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The walls they'd both built, the defenses they'd maintained for so long, began to crack. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Jack's voice held a hint of wry humor, but his eyes were serious. "Both so scared of being hurt that we forget how to let people in." Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of shame or sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finding someone who understood. The morning sun had barely risen when Jack appeared at Emily's door. "Get your jacket," he said softly. "I want to show you something." Emily followed him through the dewy grass, their footsteps leaving dark impressions in the morning frost. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the gentle sounds of birds welcoming the day. Jack led her down a winding path she hadn't noticed before, through a cluster of tall pines that opened up to reveal a sight that made her catch her breath. A small lake stretched before them, its surface like polished glass in the early morning light. Mist rose from the water in delicate wisps, dancing in the golden rays of sunrise. The shoreline was dotted with smooth stones and weather-worn logs, nature's own sitting area. Jack gestured to one of the larger logs. "I come here sometimes when things get too loud in my head." Emily settled onto the log, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. Jack sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. For a while, they just watched the mist swirl across the water's surface, listening to the gentle lapping of tiny waves against the shore. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, afraid to break the peaceful silence. "My father used to bring me here," Jack said, his voice matching her quiet tone. "He'd tell me that water doesn't judge. It just is. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, successful or struggling. The reflection you see is just you." Emily looked down at their reflections in the still water. The morning light softened their features, making them look almost otherworldly. She saw herself, small beside Jack's larger frame, but somehow not diminished by the comparison. "I've spent so much time trying to be what others wanted," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A perfect wife, a mother. When all those things fell apart, I felt like I had nothing left." A fish jumped somewhere in the distance, sending ripples across their reflections. Jack remained silent, giving her space to continue. "But sitting here," Emily gestured at the peaceful scene around them. "Nature doesn't care if I can have children or not. The sun still rises, the birds still sing, the water still flows. Maybe." She paused, struggling to put her feelings into words. "Maybe I've been measuring my worth by the wrong things." Jack shifted slightly beside her, and she felt his warm hand cover hers where it rested on the log. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it anchored her to the moment. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I see someone who gets up every morning and faces the day, even when it hurts. Someone who helps others at the shelter, even while carrying her own pain. Someone who has more strength than she knows." Emily felt tears prickling at her eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed before. These felt cleansing, like the morning dew around them. Jack turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunrise. His hand tightened slightly over hers as he spoke. "You're enough, Emily, just as you are." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Emily felt them ring true in her heart. She looked out over the peaceful lake, its surface now painted with the colors of dawn, and finally believed it. The morning after their visit to the lake, Emily walked through the doors of the community center with steady steps. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh bread filled the air as volunteers prepared for another day of serving those in need. But something felt different today. She felt different. "Emily," called Sarah, one of the regular volunteers, waving from behind a stack of donated clothes. "We could really use your help sorting these." Emily smiled, making her way over. Her hands moved automatically through the piles of garments, sorting by size and season. As she worked, she watched the steady stream of people coming through the doors, each with their own story, their own struggles. A young mother caught her eye, struggling to manage 3 small children while trying to look through the food items. Without hesitation, Emily approached her. "Would you like some help?" she asked, kneeling down to eye level with the youngest child, who was starting to fuss. The mother's relief was immediate. Oh, would you? It's been a rough morning. I understand rough mornings, Emily said softly, taking the squirming toddler's hand. She began entertaining the child with silly faces, while the mother gathered what she needed. The little one's giggles echoed through the center, drawing smiles from others nearby. As she helped the family, Emily felt something shift inside her. Here was a mother struggling, yet doing her best. And here was Emily, able to help, to make a difference. Not because she could have children of her own, but because she had compassion, patience, and understanding to share. Throughout the morning, Emily found herself moving from one task to another with renewed energy. She helped an elderly man find a warm coat, listened to a teenager's worries about school, and organized the food pantry with careful attention to expiration dates. Each interaction, each small act of kindness, felt like a stitch helping to mend something within her that had been torn. During the lunch rush, she worked alongside other volunteers, serving hot meals with a warmth that went beyond the steam rising from the plates. She noticed details she might have missed before, how one regular visitor always saved half his bread for later, how another needed her coffee extra hot because she had a long walk home. "You seem different today," remarked Tom, an older volunteer who'd been running the kitchen for years. He was stirring a massive pot of soup as he spoke. "There's a light about you." Emily paused, ladle mid-air over a bowl. "I feel different," she admitted. "Like I'm finally seeing things clearly." A woman approached the serving line, her eyes downcast, shoulders hunched, a posture Emily recognized all too well. As she served her, Emily made sure to meet her eyes, to smile, to ask her name. The woman, Maria, straightened slightly at the personal connection. "Would you like to sit with me while you eat?" Emily offered, noticing Maria's hesitation to join the crowded tables. As they sat together, Maria slowly opened up about losing her job, about feeling like a failure. Emily listened, really listened, recognizing the shame and self-doubt in Maria's words. She shared some of her own story, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who understood the journey. "You're not alone," Emily told her, touching Maria's hand lightly. "And this moment doesn't define you." The words came naturally now, words she wished someone had said to her months ago. As she spoke them, Emily realized she wasn't just helping Maria, she was also healing herself, one act of kindness at a time. The sun had begun its descent behind the trees, casting long shadows across Jack's property. Emily sat on the back porch, watching the sky turn into a canvas of orange and pink hues. The evening air was cool against her skin, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. Jack's heavy boots announced his presence before she saw him. He emerged from inside, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. Emily noticed a slight tremor in his usually steady movements as he handed her one. "Thanks," she said softly, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. Jack settled into the chair beside her, his large frame making it seem smaller than it was. The silence between them felt different tonight, charged with something unspoken. Emily could sense his tension, so unlike his usual calm demeanor. "Emily," he began, his voice rougher than usual. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Emily, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, struck by the vulnerability in his eyes. This was Jack, Talon Malone, the man who commanded respect wherever he went. Yet here he sat, looking almost nervous. "These past few months," he continued, his fingers tightening around his mug. "Watching you grow stronger, seeing you rebuild yourself, it's been incredible." Emily's heart began to race. She watched as Jack set his mug down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "I never expected this," he said, his voice low and earnest. "When I brought you here that night, I just wanted to help. But something happened along the way." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I fell in love with you, Emily." The words hung in the air between them. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Jack continued. "It's not just your vulnerability, though that touched my heart from the start. It's your strength, your resilience, the way you care for others at the center, how you faced every challenge head on." His eyes met hers, intense and sincere. "The way you make me want to be better, to open up again." Emily's hands trembled around her mug. She set it down carefully, afraid she might drop it. "I love how you see the best in people, even after everything you've been through," Jack went on, his voice growing softer. "I love your compassion, your determination, the way you smile when you're helping others, like you've found your purpose again." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His calloused fingers were gentle against her skin. "I know this might complicate things," he said, "and if you don't feel the same way, I understand. Nothing has to change. You'll always have a home here, regardless." Emily looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his presence. Everything he'd just said resonated with emotions she'd been trying to sort through herself. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I think I've fallen in love with you too." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but undeniably true. She squeezed his hand, gathering courage. "I never thought I could feel this way again, but you made me believe in myself again, in love again." The kitchen was filled with warm light and the aroma of home-cooked food. Emily stood at the counter, chopping vegetables while Jack tended to something simmering on the stove. It felt different now, the air between them charged with possibility rather than uncertainty. "I haven't cooked for anyone special in years," Jack admitted, stirring the pot of pasta sauce. His leather vest hung on a chair, replaced by a simple black t-shirt that showed off his tattooed arms. Emily smiled, sliding the chopped vegetables into a bowl. "I guess we're both a little rusty at this." Jack reached past her for the salt, his presence solid and warm behind her. "Maybe," he said, his voice soft. "But some things just feel right, don't they?" They worked together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the kitchen as if they'd been doing this for years. Emily set the small table in the breakfast nook, while Jack finished the sauce. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a bottle of wine. Simple, but intimate. "This looks amazing," Emily said, as Jack served the pasta, the rich tomato sauce steaming. She watched him settle into his chair across from her, still slightly amazed at how this massive man could move with such gentleness. Jack poured them each a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Emily echoed, touching her glass to his. The crystal made a clear, sweet sound. As they ate, their conversation flowed naturally, touching on hopes and dreams they'd never dared voice before. The future suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than dread. "I've been thinking," Jack said, setting down his fork. "The community center needs someone to run the daily operations, someone who understands what it means to need help, and who knows how to give it with dignity." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Are you offering me a job?" "If you want it," he replied. "I've seen how good you are with people there, how much they trust you." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'd love that. It would mean so much to be able to help others the way you helped me." Jack's thumb traced circles on her palm. "You did the hard work yourself, Emily. I just provided the space for you to heal." "You provided more than that," she said softly. "You showed me I wasn't broken, that I still had value." Jack stood up and moved around the table, pulling Emily to her feet. His arms encircled her, strong and secure. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "You're home now," he whispered into her hair. "Not just in this house. You have a place here." He placed a hand over his heart. "Right here." Emily closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words wash over her. In his arms, she finally felt what she'd been searching for all along. Not just shelter, but belonging. Not just safety, but love. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees surrounding Jack's property, now their shared home. Emily stood by the window of her office in the community center, watching volunteers unload boxes of donations. 6 months had passed since that stormy night when Jack had found her at the diner, and her life had transformed in ways she never imagined possible. She smiled as she noticed Jack's imposing figure directing the volunteers, his leather vest catching the sunlight. Despite his intimidating appearance, the local kids adored him, often running up to give him high fives or show him their drawings. Today was no different. A small group of children had gathered around him, eager to help with the donations. Emily's desk was covered with thank you notes from families they'd helped. Each card represented a story of hope, a reminder that pain could lead to purpose. She picked up one decorated with crayon hearts, remembering the single mother who'd written it after they'd helped her find stable housing and a job. "Miss Emily," a familiar voice called from the doorway. It was Sarah, one of their regular volunteers. "The new family just arrived. They seem pretty scared." Emily nodded, understanding completely. She'd been in their shoes not so long ago. "I'll be right there." In the main hall, she found a woman and her teenage son, their possessions packed in 2 worn suitcases. The woman's eyes held that same lost look Emily had carried for so long. "I'm Emily," she said softly, extending her hand. "Welcome to your temporary home." As Emily showed them around, explaining their programs and services, she caught glimpses of Jack through the windows, still working with the volunteers. He'd catch her eye occasionally, giving her that special smile that made her heart warm. Later that afternoon, they walked through their expanding community garden, where residents grew their own vegetables. What had started as a small patch had blossomed into a thriving space where people could heal through nurturing new life. Emily stopped to adjust a tomato plant's support stake, remembering how therapeutic gardening had been in her own healing process. "Remember when you first came here?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. "You wouldn't even look me in the eye." Emily laughed softly. "I was terrified. This big, scary biker offering me shelter, I thought I was crazy to accept. And now look at you," he said proudly, "running this place better than I ever could." They reached the center of the garden, where benches surrounded a small fountain. It had become a peaceful gathering spot for their community members. Emily watched as the new teenage boy they'd welcomed earlier sat, reading, already looking more relaxed than when he'd arrived. "It's amazing," Emily mused, "how life has a way of turning pain into purpose." Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You did that, sweetheart. You took your hurt and transformed it into something beautiful." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as their community members went about their daily routines. Some tended to the vegetables, others sat chatting on the benches, while children played nearby. The scene before them was alive with hope and healing. Emily leaned into Jack's embrace, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. Together they'd created something neither of them had expected. A place where broken spirits could mend, where second chances were real, and where love grew as naturally as the flowers in their garden. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.